Hello, welcome to today's AT&T CyberThreat Report for October 6, 2011. Joining us today, we have Jim Clausing. Jim Clausing is a malware analysis expert. He's also our connection to the malware analysis community. Welcome, Jim. What are you planning to discuss today?
Well, I wanted to do a quick update on an Apache mod proxy vulnerability that was just announced yesterday. Some new Android malware, and just a brief talk about the Samsung Galaxy S2 screen lock issue that's been in the press this week.
All right, great. I think those will all be good topics to discuss. And we have Dave Gross here. Dave is a regular on the program, a senior incident response analyst, as well as leads our malware analysis activities. Welcome, Dave. And what do you plan to discuss?
Thank you. I'm going to talk about the death this week of Steve Jobs and some security things that you should be aware of, in light of this kind of thing, and also just kind of taking a look at some of his accomplishments.
Clearly, Steve Jobs was a big contributor to the community, and I think it's sort of right to reflect on that. And we also have John Hogoboom here today. John is a recognized expert in security and analyst, and also does tools development for us. Welcome, John, and what do you have to discuss today?
Thanks, Brian. I got a quick one to discuss on a new security hole that was uncovered in a few HTC Android phones. So we'll cover that one.
All right, great. So we have a number of items that are associated with mobility directly and indirectly, so that should be some interesting discussion. I'm Brian Rexroad. I'll cover the Internet Weather Report, and as always, if you have questions, feedback, or suggestions on topics you think we should cover, please feel free to contact us. The email address is cyberthreat@list.att.com. There is a link off the Tech Channel webpage where this video is posted as well. So let's go ahead and move on here. Steve Jobs, Dave, what's going on here?
Thanks, Brian. Basically, unfortunately, Steve Jobs passed away this Wednesday, October the 5th. And as with any very newsworthy event, we're expecting that there's going to be a lot of media attention and a lot of curious people that can be convinced to go looking at phishing or malicious activity. There may be all kinds of things related to, come see more details about his life, about his accomplishments, about his death, whatever. And so just be on guard. Make sure that you're going to legitimate sites, not, some questionable sites that you haven't visited before. Also, because this, the Apple is related to phones and stuff like that, there may be some malicious apps out there, maybe not in the Apple's side of things, but maybe on the Android side where it's a little easier to get malicious code in there. So there may be different things as far as, tributes to them or screensavers or whatever to be on the alert for them.
Yeah,
Dave. The next thing I wanted to talk about is just some of his accomplishments, just to kind of reflect back on what he's contributed to the community. He co-founded or led 3 companies, Apple, the Next, and Pixar Studios. He also changed the ecosystem for music. I mean, now we have iTunes and the ability to have your music with you as you go around and that sort of thing, and having all your songs together and being able to purchase them online and stuff was very novel kind of thing. He also had a lot to do with changing the mobility device industry. the devices now are more like computers, or evolving to be more like computers than they are just phones. They're a lot more capable. Also, you have the App Store where you can get all kinds of different applications and, allow you to have a lot of different capabilities on your phone that can grow over time. And people can contribute their own applications and have kind of an entrepreneurial spirit to get a lot more innovation there. He was the primary or co-inventor on 338 patents or patent applications, which, since he was only 56 when he died, that's an amazing feat. I mean, it's an amazing feat no matter what your age, but, with his short lifetime, he had quite a bit there. He also got a number of awards and recognitions. He got the National Medal of Technology and Innovation, Jefferson Award for Public Service. He was inducted into the California Hall of Fame, and he was announced as from Fortune magazine the CEO of the decade. And, basically, if you want to think about what he's done, he's not been satisfied with the status quo, not been doing so much as far as incremental improvements or in terms of reactionary kind of things where something comes out and you react to it and have something to deal with that, where we sometimes get in that trap in security.
Right.
But what he did was he was about fundamental change. Let's completely change the game and do things in a very, very different way.
Right. So Dave, I think one of the sort of interesting aspects of this, you've pointed out a lot of his accomplishments. I think one of the things that Steve has been very much well known for as well is that he is one that is fanatical about the details. And, personally, my observations have been that anytime there's been a project that's been particularly successful, you can point to a person and almost in relationship how fanatical there is a person that is leading that project, how fanatical they are about the details of the project, what things go in, and even more importantly, perhaps, what things don't go into that project. Being able to say, this isn't important, we shouldn't work on that, I think is an important aspect of this as well. And clearly, Steve Jobs was well recognized for those attributes as well.
Right, and he was also, based on the products that we've seen, he was also very concerned about the design, and the aesthetics of it, not just the functionality. So, he wanted things that, were slim and sleek and really had some artistic design to it to some degree.
Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of what we recognize in terms of user interfaces, a Windows-based interface, for example, we tend to associate the word Windows with Microsoft, but that whole concept really started as a part of the Apple GUI interface. And, a lot of us probably don't even remember a time when we were working with computers without sort of a Windows interface. But, basic concepts like that, taking technology and making it presentable to those that aren't necessarily technology buffs is, sort of a keynote of his innovations.
Yeah.
Very good. Jim, it sounded like you may have had a comment earlier, but...
Yeah, we seem to do this every time there's some big, news story, whether it's celebrity things or natural disasters. And Dave had mentioned it at the beginning, but I've already heard reports today of malicious links on Facebook that are trying to take advantage of Steve's death.
So there are always those with malicious intent that are trying to take advantage of So very good. Thanks very much for that, Dave. Your comments there, Jim. And Jim, you're not up next year. What's going on in the malware space?
Yeah, the first thing I wanted to talk about real quickly was yesterday Apache sent out a security alert about a vulnerability in the mod proxy module, which basically can be used as in the web server to turn an ordinary web server into a proxy server. And there are legitimate reasons for wanting to do that. But this particular issue is with not validating the input, and it's a problem that we see, in a lot of web apps, and in this case, it's within a module in the web server itself. Basically what can happen is that if the bad guys send improperly formed URL to the proxy module, they can access systems other than the ones are intended. They can access other systems behind the proxy, inside the protected. So there's a new version of mod proxy, should be out any day now, that will fix this. But in the meantime, you should be watching your logs and perhaps potentially disable this until you get the new version in there.
All right. So there is a way to disable this, Jim?
Essentially, you'd have to turn off the proxy functionality probably for a while. The issue is with the way that mod proxy operates with the rewrite rules, and I don't want to go into a whole lot of detail on that, but at the moment, it doesn't look like there's a simple workaround, because the issue was that mod proxy wasn't validating the input strings well enough, and they were allowing what would be invalid HTTP URIs.
So let me see if I understand this correctly. This is a feature that you would turn on in certain circumstances. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's basically if you wanted to in an enterprise, run a web proxy, but you didn't, want to set up separate hardware for it, and you didn't want to use Squid or a Blue Code device or something like that to do your web proxying, you can actually enable a module within Apache and use Apache as your web proxy.
Okay. So do you have any idea, obviously this is going to be very much a sort of a guess, but do you have any idea how often this might be used in practice?
There are quite a few enterprises, smaller enterprises. I wouldn't expect to see it in a company the size of ours, or any Fortune 500 probably, will spend the money on another dedicated device. Mm. But smaller enterprises, this module's been there for quite a long time, and it's available by default. In the default Apache install, you can get it as a package on Ubuntu and Debian and Red Hat and all of the Linux distributions. So it's easy to install, and so I don't know numbers that are actually using it. I'm not sure that the Apache folks would even be able to guess at that, but it's out there, it's available, it's easy to set up, so I'm sure that there are a fair number of folks using it.
Right. Okay.
So I just had a question, Jim. The proxy, is it when it's set up as a forward proxy, acting like a regular proxy server, or is it as a reverse proxy when you're, trying to proxy stuff on the inside of your network and only want to get certain access for certain machines? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and the way I read the bulletin, it looks like it's when it's set up as a normal proxy,
okay.
Because it's the issue with it matching the return results.
Okay.
So.
All right, very good. Thanks, Jim. So next item you had.
Yeah, the next one that I had is our continuing what's the new mobile malware out there. There was some new Android malware that first showed up. I first heard about it almost 2 weeks ago, but we didn't talk about it last week because we had such a full show. But this current one is called the AnServer bot. Basically, what's new about this one that's a little different from the Android malware we've seen in the past is that this particular piece of malware, when it checks in with its command and control, it goes to a blog and reads an encrypted string from a blog entry and decrypts that to find the URL for a secondary server that has new payloads or other instructions for it. In the past, we've seen malware in the Windows world that would, for example, look at comments, encrypted comments within HTML for their command and control. But this is the first Android, or to the best of my knowledge, first mobile malware that we've seen that was using something similar for command and control. In this case, it was a blog entry. So,
hey, Jim, do you know, is that like a well-known blogging service, or is it one of those smaller fly-by-night blogs somewhere?
I don't remember where the primary was set up. Trying to remember.
All right. Well, this is how I interpret this as sort of a good news, bad news story in some sense, in that one of the sort of challenges with this kind of thing, I think probably where John was leading with this, is that when this kind of thing occurs, a good blogging site, one that's sensitive about security, would have some sort of scanning activity that is basically an automated scanning through the blogging activity to look for characteristics of this kind of thing, and we'll be able to remediate that. And perhaps use that as a detection mechanism to highlight any malware that's not already known. And but the bad news is that not all sites will do that. Part of this is, I guess, the other sort of subtle good news in this is I presume that when you have using a blogging site of that sort, the ability to dynamically control the bots will be somewhat limited in comparison to perhaps some other environments where they can dynamically, actively issue commands out to those bots.
Well, maybe. If it's if it's on a blog spot or a WordPress site that is pretty active. We've got a corporate blog that we put up a couple posts a day. So.
Right. Absolutely. But
I was going to ask you, are there certain apps that this is hiding in? This particular Trojan? Or how does it get on the phone?
It looks like this was, again, as with lots of the Android malware, it first appeared as on some of the Chinese language markets. I don't recall how the initial, whether this was a Trojan something, some other app. I think it was, but I don't recall off the top of my head now.
Is there any reason why this couldn't control both phones and computers at the same time? I mean, if they're just looking at blogs, I imagine that it would be able to be referenced from either.
Yes, absolutely, and it they could just as easily have a section, depending on what OS you're running, grab this secondary payload or grab that secondary payload. So yeah, it could just as easily be used to control some other malware. But yeah, the novel piece about this is the first time that we've seen the mobile malware that was using this type of thing, and the fact that the post that it was reading off the blog was encrypted, made it a little more difficult for us to figure out what it was saying. We had to get a copy of the malware and figure out what it was doing in order to be able to decrypt the post ourselves to find the secondary.
Right. Okay, so I just wanted to point out we're getting a little bit of help from our production staff here online, and it apparently disguises itself as an e-book reader. Is sort of targeting the Chinese language community out there, and there's a specific URL that is used for that command and control, so which I think you were sort of alluding to as well. All right, very good. Thank you, Jim. And let's see here. I guess next we have John. You had some little discussion about some Android issue. Is that correct?
Yeah. So there's a new security vulnerability that was found if you have an HTC skinned Android phone, and the Evo 4G, the Thunderbolt is two that we know of. There's a few others I think out there. But basically what it is within this particular Sense software that HTC has on these phones, it's basically a skin that they kind of wrap onto the Android phone, which a lot of vendors do specifically for Android to kind of give a different flavor for each Android handset that they have. In any event, there's a particular app that they have that's part of that HTC Sense package. It's called HTC Logger.apk. It gets dumped on your Android phone, or it's actually on your Android phone by default. And that actually has some functionality in there, and we're not quite sure. HTC has not responded why this functionality is in here yet. However, it captures GPS location information, phone numbers that you've dialed or received calls from, contacts, SMS messaging, and all that assorted information. The interesting thing about this is any app that gets on your phone can look at this log file that's stored on that phone, and all they need to do is ask for the internet permission. So if you've ever used apps on an Android phone, it'll usually prompt you for certain types of permission that this app requires in order to do what it wants to do. The only thing it will need to ask for is the Android permission internet, and in doing so, it's able to get access to that log file. And then it could use that or upload it to someplace or use that information for whatever means. It almost allows you to have your phone spied on. So it's a little bit of a security flaw in this particular version of the HTC Sense software. You'll probably have to wait for a patch to come out from the vendor for that. That's about the only way you're going to get it fixed, unless you want to go root your phone and you can remove the package yourself. But most people aren't going to know how to do that. So,
which we don't recommend, right?
What's that?
We don't recommend rooting the phone.
I don't recommend it, but if you're really worried about it, it is an option. That's about the only option to get at that file.
So, John, I think this is actually an interesting topic in two senses. I think in one sense, you describe it as a security flaw. Clearly, the community is interpreting this as a security flaw. But I think this is a sort of a shift in the mobility development environment in comparison to what we have typically exercised, even from a security standpoint, in the, say, a server environment, where typically what we tend to do, the security community tends to be fighting to get logs turned on so that you have some forensics information if there is some sort of attack attempt or a successful attack against the system. This is a case where it's almost the opposite kind of scenario. That is, since the device is out in the world and could be lost, or we're concerned about malware getting on there and stealing this information, it suddenly becomes logging is not necessarily to your advantage, it's a disadvantage. So it's an interesting balance here, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, but in the in the Unix Windows world, we tend to recommend that the sensitive logs be protected so they can't be read by everybody, and that's the big problem here. The logs themselves wouldn't be such an issue if it wasn't so easy to get access to them.
You're absolutely right. Absolutely. All right, very good. Thanks for that. The next thing we have here is a little, the Samsung Galaxy S2, I guess, has very recently been released, and it didn't take too long before somebody found what apparently is a security flaw associated with that. Jim, can you give us a little outline of what's going on here?
Yeah, the Samsung's newest phone is the Galaxy S2. It's their newest Android phone. It's supposed to be a really nice phone. I've not had one in my hands yet, but a few days ago, stories started hitting the press about an issue with the AT&T version of it, where they were claiming that the unlock password or pattern could be bypassed in certain situations. Now, it turns out that there is a way to solve the problem, and that's to set the timeout on the screen lock to immediate. Basically, as it's being distributed, the default timeout is 5 minutes, so the screen goes blank, but it isn't actually locked for 5 minutes. This allows somebody to potentially pick up your phone if you laid it down and walked away, and if you have been accessing it within 5 minutes, they can bypass the pattern or the PIN setup and be able to access all of the contacts or whatever you've got on your phone. So I would urge folks who have gotten this new phone, which has only been out, AT&T's only had it for the last couple of days, to immediately set that timeout to immediately.
All right, very good. Yeah, I think this is a case where I think a patch may well be in the works. I think as much as anything else, the issue is that it prompts for the password, but doesn't necessarily require the password here, and so it's deceiving in terms of what it's trying to achieve. I know some other devices that they're, if you haven't timed out, you can immediately go back into the device. I think the significant issue here is that it prompts for the password, leading you to believe that it's protected by the password, and it's not. So important to realize that, and hopefully Apache will be out for that soon to alleviate that issue. In the meantime, physically protect the device anyway, and as you said, set the timeout to immediate.
Yep. If you remember to hang on to your phone, it's not a big deal, but
absolutely. Okay, thanks very much, Jim. And let's see, next on the agenda here, we have the Internet Weather Report. We have, I would say, what I would call a somewhat quiet week here, knock on wood. Hopefully next week will not be significantly different. But there are a few things that I'd like to share with you here to make sure that we have some, in terms of anomalies, as well as sort of some existing activities that you should be aware of. So first of all, we have some, I think we've reported on this before, some P2P activity on port 6257 UDP. Again, I've been reporting on this partly because it's very inconsistent in this activity. It doesn't appear that it's really security related. I've given it sort of a yellow flag here, but something that does make me a little bit uncomfortable because it is sort of on and off. We'll take a look at that. We have some continuing activity that we've reported on previously related to port 5631, scanning activity. There's a new port that's also related with the same application, 5632. We'll take a look at the activity there. We've been reporting on the activity for port 23, Telnet, week after week for a while now, so we'll take a look at the status on that. An old friend is back. We'll take a look at this port 2967 TCP. That has a very, in the distant history, I think around 2007 time frame, there were some worm activity associated with that particular port. We'll take a look at it, and because there is some scanning there, and a couple of other items here that we'll take a quick look at it as well. So without delaying too much here, as I said, port 6257 UDP, this very much has the profile of P2P activity. It's associated with this WinMX application, probably file sharing application. As I said, the thing that makes me a little uncomfortable here is that we see activity on and off again. And it could be that it's a particular community of participants in this file sharing that is on and off, but something to be sort of wary of. And you know, the participants in this have the profile of mostly consumer IP addresses, as you know, broadband connections. So it doesn't appear that it would be a significant effect on an enterprise, but again, something you want to at least be aware of. The next item here, we reported, as I said, on port 5631, scanning activity. This is measured in terms of the probing activity that we've seen. Two observations here. One is that another port that's also associated with the same application, and this is a Symantec PC Anywhere. PC Anywhere is a remote access application. And I believe the second port is actually associated with some sort of a status information. So I don't think these ports are equivalent in terms of use. I think they have a different purpose. But what we're seeing, and it's actually probably a little difficult to see on the video, so I'm going to try to point it out, is that just recently, that is literally today, we've started to see some scanning activity on this second port. One thing I was able to identify is that the scanning activity for this second port is being conducted by the same addresses that are doing the scanning activity or have been doing the scanning activity on port 5631. The other thing I wanted to point out is that we have seen some what I would describe as very aggressive scanning activity on this port on a very spurious, in a very spurious way. So whereas we see sort of some scanning activity down here, the scale that we're looking at is on the order of hundreds of millions of probes per hour that we've seen on, on rare occasions, but on occasion. And this was actually about 2 weeks ago that and I think we reported on this, in fact, previously. But I just wanted to sort of reemphasize that. Since then, we've seen sort of on and off again scanning, and again, the additional port that's been recently added. The next one, we've been reporting on this activity on port 23 for some time now. This was, if we recall, way back when. We're looking at 90 days of data here, so this is actually going back about 80 days or so, where there was a large increase in the number of sources that were scanning. A lot of the activity had been attributed to a particular provider in Korea, and we're at the point now where the activity is still continuing to decrease relatively slowly at this point. I think last time we reported on this, or at least 2 weeks ago when I had reported on this, about 87% of the sources were in Korea. Now we're down to about 74% of the sources that are in Korea. So it's a continuing improvement to what appears to have been some sort of problem that occurred in that space. Next item here is some scan probes that we're seeing on port 2967. This particular port is associated with a management capability associated with Symantec antivirus. I didn't get a chance to research specifically on how this port is normally used, but I did want to point out that we are seeing some spurious scanning activity. It showed up on our weekly summary here, where it's, I would say, moderately aggressive scanning activity. This scale here is about 16 million probes per hour that we're seeing. We're seeing a spike here that occurred, it looks like, today, and a couple of others that have occurred over the last week or so that are probably worth paying attention to. As I mentioned, around 2007-2008 timeframe, there was some worm activity associated with this. It was taking advantage of a vulnerability in the application, was able to exploit that vulnerability and propagate a worm malware on systems. I am not sure exactly what they're probing for in this case, whether it's to see if there are any remaining exploitable devices out there, or if this is some sort of password guessing, but certainly something you want to pay attention to.
And you were out last week, Brian, but we did touch on this one as well last week. And I guess one of my observations here, just to reiterate, if you're a viewer of the program, you'll probably notice all the time it's remote access programs, or almost all the time remote access programs. Like, well, this one not particularly, but VNC, RDP, Telnet. We're seeing all kinds of scanning on these particular ports. But in any event.
Yep, absolutely. And I would say that there has been a sort of a tradition of that. Tradition is probably sort of a soft word in that sense. We've seen these kinds of probing before, but more recently, I would say in the last 6 months, 9 months or so, it seems like the emphasis has become much stronger toward sort of password guessing type of attacks. Mm-hmm. And so perhaps that's a very strong indicator, or a very encouraging indicator, I should say, that maybe the applications themselves are more secure, and the attackers are more so targeting cases where they're not being used correctly. So this is a case where how the applications get used is at least as important as the quality of the software that supports those applications. And
I'm still in one of the honeypots that I've got that sits out in consumer space. I still get at least 1 or 2 probes a week trying to exploit that old Symantec vulnerability. Hmm. That's 4 years old or more.
Absolutely. Okay, next item here. This is some scanning activity that has just sort of shown up recently. As you can see, we've seen sort of spikes of scanning activity on this port in the past, but this is port 65,500. I didn't find any very strong references to the applications that use this port. One is this Spurious application, which is basically, I think, a flavor of BitTorrent. Mm-hmm. So for some reason, there appears to be an interest in probing on this port. It seems like we've seen some more consistent activity in the last couple of days here, as opposed to the sort of short spikes we've seen in the past. So most of these probes are coming from a couple of sources in China, as is the case in many of these cases where we're picking up spurious scanning activity or scanning activity that's somewhat aggressive from a few number of sources. Unfortunately, China seems to be sort of the theme in some of this, as the source of a lot of this. Next item here is I just wanted to give sort of, as all of those items that we just reported on were related to changes that we've seen over the last week, anomalies that have been picked up. This is a look at sort of the steady state, if you will. That is typically what we're seeing on the top of the list in terms of the most probes is still port 445. That's the service management block associated with this. We're going to take a quick look at this in a moment here. And followed by targeting Microsoft SQL database. port 22, that's SSH. That would be password guessing predominantly. 8909, which is a proxy application that presumably looking for anonymous proxies or perhaps an inroad to get access to the server itself. Port 3389, we had talked about that, the Mortar Worm. I'm going to give a quick update on that in a moment here. And some of these others, port 8080, an alternate port for web, which is also used for proxying. I think that pretty much covers it. I think, as John had pointed out earlier, we also have some more remote access applications that are showing up in this list, too. So let's take a quick look at port 445 SMB. What I'm showing here is actually the last year's worth of data. And we're looking at the number of sources that are scanning on that port. And this is in the scale of tens of thousands. So the peak here at this time was about 45,000 sources that we see scanning in a particular hour. Now, different time zones, different times of day when computers are active and when it happens to be visible to us on the network has an impact on the count here. There are actually a lot of sources that are scanning on port 445, much larger than that 45,000, but this gives us sort of a relative time measurement. But the thing I wanted to share with you here is over the last really 3 months or so, we've seen a pretty significant decline in the number of sources that are doing that scanning. Hopefully that's a very good news story. It seems to have flattened out over the last week or so, but I'm hoping that trend will continue. This may be, in fact, sort of two different things. One is that SMB has traditionally been a target for exploits. It's also a target for weak file shares. That is, you know, if you have a file sharing application over the internet, particularly Windows file sharing, or even Sambo, the Linux flavor of that file sharing, port 445 would be a target for doing password guessing attacks against those file shares. I think this is one area that I think most organizations have become somewhat privy to or knowledgeable about, that is file sharing over the internet is probably a little, should be scary, if not just avoided altogether. But in any case, we are seeing what could be a reduced interest. It could also be a good indication that the configure worm, which has been associated with an exploit on this port, is also being remediated. I know a lot of organizations are getting involved in notifying victims of the configure worm and trying to get those victims to fix up their machines.
I wonder if it also has to do with machine upgrades. I mean, if people are going to newer operating systems like Windows 7 and stuff like that, then the old XP systems may be being retired.
Yeah,
so
that's a good.
That may be part of the effect too.
Yep, all of those will be moving in the right direction. The good news here is that we're seeing movement in the right direction, not in the bad direction.
Mm-hmm.
And then last but not least, I wanted to at least give a quick update. We've been reporting on the Mortar Worm for some time now. The main thing is that even though the Mortar Worm has kind of softened in terms of the press information that's out there, and in fact, it was reported that the scanning function that is scanning on port 3389, that's remote desktop protocol, had been turned off or disabled in the Mortar Worm devices. We did see that for a period of time. In fact, we saw it sort of turn off altogether for a period of time, but lo and behold, as of today, we're seeing an upward set of activity, so that port is being scanned more aggressively again. Not so much in the number of probes, but in terms of the number of sources that are doing that probing. The Mortar Worm is not gone. It's still active, I think, and I'm not sure about the motivation of turning it on and off like this, but it certainly still is in existence. So with that, that concludes the weather report here, and unless there are any other comments from the team. Again, a quick reminder, if you have feedback, questions, recommendations on things we should cover, you can contact us at cyberthreat@list.att.com. You can get this program from the AT&T Tech Channel. That's techchannel.att.com. I think there's a tab for the shows on the program, you would be looking for the CyberThreat Report. And similarly, you can search for the AT&T CyberThreat Report on YouTube or as on iTunes as a podcast and get it there. I want to thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, John. And I'm Brian Rexroad, and we'd like to bid you a safe week on the Internet and on your enterprise networks as well.